Broadcasting. And the channel is live. So, hello everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we are going to talk about The Big Lebowski and Big Trouble in Little China. Not necessarily in that order, but we'll talk about that order. We hadn't decided what order to do them in. I just arbitrarily said them in, I guess, I guess technically alphabetical order, but they both start with big, so it's a question of like, well, it's the Big Lebowski versus just anyway. How are you doing, Mike?
I'm, I'm good.
Good, good.
Listening to
So
you figure this out. So
yeah, well, so the when we chose these movies last time, the theme presented was old reliables, like when it comes to comedies, like movies that you can just always put on and get a laugh. Uh, and so that you chose The Big Lebowski, I chose Big Trouble in Little China. So, do you have thoughts over which you would like to cover first? I
no,
Okay. Well, how about this? Let's do Big Trouble in Little China first.
yeah,
All right. So, one note that I observed to myself as I rewatched this movie is that although I do love it, and I certainly consider it an old reliable, and it is often funny, it's kind of less a straight out comedy compared to, say, The Big Lebowski. Because it's
I was having
certainly
that same observation. It's really funny.
okay.
Yeah,
Well, I think certainly in the context that we were deciding to watch it and then watching it, it's like, oh yeah, a lot of this movie is just kind of straight up action adventure with sprinkling of comedy, as opposed to a comedy, and that doesn't mean it's not still an old reliable, but that was certainly one of the first things that I observed in rewatching it is that like it's more a comedy than say the comparison I was going to make was the current crop of MCU movies, but you haven't been keeping up with those, so you just can't necessarily comment on that. But the point being, the humor is more than just the occasional quippy line or bit of comic relief to break the tension. It's more comedic than that, but it's also just got a lot of just action that's not really comedy in particular. But if anyone hasn't seen it, the basic premise is that we've got Kurt Russell playing Jack Burton, one of his iconic characters. He had a string of them in this time period, with the Thing and Snake Plissken in the Escape from New York, and in this lots of quotable lines. But he meets up with one of his good friends, Wang Chi, who is like they are definitely friends, but there's occasionally a little bit of a rivalry, sort of contentious relationship. But given that Wang Chi loses a bunch of money to Jack, Jack decides he's going to tag along on the various errands that Wang is running until he gets paid back. But all of that is honestly incidental. What really happens is that
there's big
the
trouble in
yes,
Little
big
China.
trouble, definitely. Is that Wang Chi is intending to meet his fiance at the airport, who is coming in from China. He is from China himself, but very Americanized in the sense that he speaks with no accent at all, and is very accustomed. He's been there a while, and not okay. I'm just clarifying because otherwise people might assume, and that kind of comes into something I'm going to get into later. I'm not doing a very good job of quickly summarizing the plot. The plot of this movie is bananas. Is the reason. Essentially, what happens is it turns out that because Wang's fiance is a Chinese woman who has green eyes, certainly very unusual. It means that she is the woman who can break the prophecy of an immortal Chinese supervillain, who is under a curse that makes him immortal but sort of ghostly. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And Jack is tagging along mostly on Wang Chi's actual adventure. And one of the things that this movie does really well is it is very deliberately subverting a lot of the sorts of movies where you have a white American lead get involved with a adventure in some foreign locale or with all of that sort of thing, because although in one sense he's the protagonist of the movie, he's really the sidekick in terms of his function in the story, but he doesn't realize it. So he kind of thinks of himself as the hero, even as we watch him be kind of bumbling, while his sidekick Wang, who is the one who has actual stakes in the story and who is actually good at everything, who actually carries out a real adventure. But there's just so many things thrown in that it just makes it a lot of fun to watch, and a lot of action and all of that sort of thing. Was that as bad a summary as it felt like it was in my head, or do you think I kind of got
It
the
started.
gist of it?
It started coming back on the rails. You started to really get off with the deep description of Wang.
Yeah, well, I guess I just wanted to highlight that those are the two main characters, right? And so we've got Jack Burton, who is all machismo, Kurt Russell swagger, but then you've got Wang Chi, who is the like the real hero of the story, and he is like, he's got his own sort of charm, and he's funny, and like he's sort of like his own sort of star of a different movie. It's just the humor comes from us being like the camera being framed just a little, like 3 feet to the left of where the actual action is happening, because we're focusing on this guy who is actually the comic relief in some other story. But it's just full of a lot of exciting action and cool adventure and quotable lines and all of these sorts of things. What Part of the reason that I wanted to talk about it first was because I was a little bit worried that it was going to be just me reenacting the Chris Farley bit of, that scene where he came in and he shot the ceiling. That was awesome. Like, so you see what I'm saying? Like, so rescue me, Mike. Tell us a little bit. What were your thoughts? You had seen this movie, but revisiting it.
I mean, the first thought I had was the same as what you just said, is that I was kind of like, I remember this movie being funny, and it is funny, but it's not a comedy. Like, that kind of hit me too, which doesn't make it inappropriate to watch for this purpose. It was just, I remember it more as a comedy than it actually is. And I think it's because what you said, it has a lot of memorable scenes. And part of why it's an old reliable is it just gives you an overall, like, good feeling. Like, the plot is absurd. The character that we focus on is absurd.
Right.
It's just, it's so silly, but it doesn't care. It treats it like super serious, but not. I don't know. It's like weird. Like, because almost like you said, there's sort of this one universe where like Wang's in it, and it's a very serious, high stakes, like bad Chinese ghost that's trying to steal his thing. And then there's the other one where Burton exists, and this is also ridiculous, and he's a campy villain, and he's like super floaty and made up weird, and like he's just odd. Like, it's all just, and there's a gorilla thingy that somehow is involved and fights people. It's like, it doesn't matter.
And the three storms and the weird little floating eyeball
the inspiration
beholder
for Mortal Kombat guys.
And like video game super villain astral projection fighting, and it's got all sorts of crazy stuff. But like the framing, like this movie has a tone unlike almost, I can't really even think of another movie that really tries to walk the balance that this one does, in having some things feel more serious and high stakes, but other things feel really silly and ridiculous, but having those both kind of matter and cross over and go back and forth, right? Because while Jack Burton is often buffoonish, sometimes he really does help out, right? And while Wang Chi is actually charismatic and competent and, emotionally invested and he's like the real hero, but there are times when he either makes a mistake or he's joking around too, right? Like, so none of the characters are only one thing,
Right.
but the movie interweaves these comedic and serious threads in a way that I can't really think of any other movie that quite does that. Because there's lots of movies that are mostly serious but occasionally have comic relief. But this one is really, like, the comic relief is much more integral to the plot.
Right. It's not like something from a similar time, like Die Hard is probably a good,
Right.
contemporary to this movie, where it's funny and Bruce Willis is a quipper and like it's kind of a silly situation, but it plays it much more serious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's almost like Wang is almost like Bruce Willis in Die Hard,
Right.
and then it's like if you just added this random ass character that just
Well,
all sort of
it's
helped out, but was just
yeah,
yeah.
it's almost like, if we want to make the Die Hard comparison, this movie is almost like if Die Hard were mostly about Argyle, the limo driver,
Yeah.
who occasionally helps out, but is mostly peripheral to the real story,
And
and is
comedic, yeah.
yeah, so it's, but at the same time, occasionally really important, and in ways that they set up. Like, just as a key example of something that I always kind of just marvel at the storytelling of, is there's a lot of silliness and bluster with Jack. We see him talking into his CB radio like he's a pre-podcasting podcaster, um, spilling all his hard-won wisdom out to the airwaves out there on this stormy night. And he's coming into San Francisco, and we see him after he makes his delivery. He's staying up all night gambling with everyone, and that's where we kind of meet up. But they make a bet that Wang suddenly gets a little bit more serious. It's like, no, I need this money. I'm going to make this cool bet. I'm going to do this cool thing where I'm going to cut a bottle in half with the machete. And like the idea this is going to cut it neatly in half instead of smashing or something, right? It's a little bit unclear what he thinks is going to happen. It seems unlikely, and so Jack takes the bet. But instead of doing either of those things, the bottle just spins out straight at Jack's head, but he just catches it pretty impressively and quips that it's all in the reflexes. But then, cut to almost the end of the movie, there's a key moment when they're trying to escape. Oh no, there's the bad guy, Lopan, and it's like, oh no, I'm going to try to throw my knife at him. Oh, but he misses. Oh no, oh no. And there's even, I'm just laughing because there's a reaction shot of Kim Cattrall, who's a journalist in this movie, going, when he misses. But then Lopan goes to throw the knife back at him, and he catches it, throws it right back, and hits. And so he's the one that kills Lopan with this amazing catching a knife thrown at him move, and then throwing it right back and nailing it right in the forehead of this super bad guy. It's all in the reflexes. And it was just kind of like, for this guy who's been a buffoon for most of the movie to suddenly be the one who actually kills the bad guy, it's kind of amazing, and yet it's earned in the story.
Yeah.
Like, that's an example, I think, of something where the movie is not making him just a clown. But meanwhile, he's certainly an outsider to all of this stuff that's happening, which allows us to be in his shoes as he is encountering all of these things that he has never heard of. And I think the movie gets a lot of humor mileage from him being the person who, in every room that he's in the movie, he's the person who knows the least about what's going on. Everyone else in the movie knows more about what's happening than Jack Burton does. In every scene, there's not a single exception. And I love all of the bits where they're giving, they manage to make exposition fun just by the virtue of everyone is constantly having to explain things to Jack who does not get it. and then occasionally the bit where like he's like, I'm starting to feel a little bit like an outsider here, and they all in unison say, "You are." But I think one of the things that's interesting to consider about this movie, and I tread carefully on this because, of course, I am not Asian American. But I think it's been my sense that this movie has aged better than some movies of that time period with regards to representation and those sorts of issues, largely because John Carpenter not only cast a lot of like actual, Chinese people to portray a diverse cast of characters who are generally speaking far more confident than any of the white characters. Competent, I should say, rather than confident. So the point being that even though it's about some of these things, and that's not to say that it couldn't still be criticized from some corners with various bits of Orientalism in terms of all of the like the mythology stuff going on, but by and large, he really did cast an awful lot of Chinese actors and Chinese American actors to portray a diverse cast of Asian American and Asian characters. And so that's one of the things that makes it stand out amongst some of its contemporaries that maybe haven't aged as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I same thing. I don't know for sure all the details of that, but it certainly feels like there's not a ton of like overtly like, there's not a lot of jokes at the expense of people being Chinese and that being like just like the thing, right? Like
Right.
to your point, like Jack is the one who is always the outsider. All of the competent characters are the Asian
Right.
characters. It's the white one that's the idiot, and
Yeah.
like you know,
Well,
so like you
and
said, there might be something with the mythology or sort of like but as far as the portrayal, I can't think of any, at least no jokes that I laugh at and remember that were made at the expense of like the Chinese culture part of it. Like
right.
almost all of the jokes are true. They're jokes about interpersonal things or how the people themselves are acting, right?
Right. Well, and so and also any example of a character that might be seen as some kind of a stereotype or another is kind of countered by the fact that there's just so many of the characters in the movie that they all sort of balance out that they're showing that like this person might embody some aspect of some stereotype, but here's another character who absolutely doesn't, and we're showing that holy cow, who would have guessed there's actually a diverse range of people. And so I think that is like I can't speak obviously to uh, the feelings of Asian American or people of Chinese descent, how they would feel watching this movie. But it's been my impression that it's real, received more favorably than a lot of the ones at the time, even if there might be individual pieces that are criticized. But I just thought that was worth noting just because a lot of times movies from this era don't hold up so well in that regard. But
It is also funny watching it because this this movie, I think you've got to imagine that the Mortal Kombat characters are designed after the like, especially Raiden.
yeah, it's got to be because although certainly, so the characters of the Three Storms. Well, I'll let you make your point rather than jumping in.
Well, it feels almost more stereotypical because they have become so embodied in our culture via Mortal Kombat
Mm-hmm.
that when you watch it, you're like, oh god, they're just doing the Mortal Kombat guys. But this was predates Mortal Kombat,
Yeah.
and I don't know enough to know if these guys are and Mortal Kombat are drawing from the same source material or if Mortal Kombat really just ripped off, these Storm characters.
So I guess I don't have firsthand knowledge of this, but certainly it's true that the characters in this movie are drawing not only on a lot of like actual, like kung fu movies and real historical kind of costume pieces that some people did where and real like mythology, not any specific real thing, but just like drawing on all of that influence. But then I think the character of Raiden in Mortal Kombat, I mean, probably there's some of that same influence in the mix, but especially given the lightning powers specifically, it really feels like Raiden from Mortal Kombat is coming
Right.
straight from these characters of the Storms in this movie. Which, again, if anyone hasn't seen this movie, the three Storms in this movie are henchmen of sorts for Lopan, who is this immortal supervillain type. Each of them has, great martial skill, but also magical powers that seem to be storm related, I guess. There's one guy who there's wind, thunder, and lightning. I think are the three, but they're the one guy is lightning. That's pretty straightforward. The other two's powers are a little bit more loosely defined, except of course the one guy who blows himself up at the end because he gets so mad,
Yeah.
which is like it's just an example of this movie swings for the fences in a lot of ways in terms of having things constantly happening on screen that we don't understand why it's happening, but that puts us in the same boat as Jack Burton, who also doesn't understand why it's happening, and none of the other characters have time to explain it to him, and so we just have to move on. But that makes it funny instead of confusing, which is just great because there's bits when they're going into the compound and they're looking down at this weird like sewer full of like sludge, and Jack asks Egg Chen, who is this classic Asian American character actor who's been in lots of things like Tremors, for example, asks him like, "What is that stuff?" And he goes, "It's the black blood of the earth." "What, you mean like oil?" "No, the black blood of the earth." And then just moves on. And then there's a bit later in that same sequence where they're creeping through, and then this weird giant bug monster comes out of a hole, eats one of the guys that's with them. Egg Chen throws a little weird like bomb at him and says, "You shall come out no more." And then moves on. And then Jack's like, "What? What will come out no more? What was that? What? Ah, damn it." And because everyone's just leaving. They don't want to. It's like, "Oh, you guys aren't surprised by a bug monster that just randomly eats someone? Sure, okay. I guess we're all right." And so that's just a running gag throughout the movie of all of these bizarre things happening that Jack doesn't understand because he's an outsider and nobody else, like either occasionally they do take the time to explain to him, but it just leaves more questions than answers. It's, I think it's a fun running gag throughout just them. Occasionally it's like, "Oh, okay, look, we can't go this way with the truck because there's all these guys in fancy robes and yellow headbands. And who are those?" And Wang explains like, "Oh, they're actually, these guys." Like, "Oh, okay. Oh, wait, we can't back up now because there's a bunch of guys with red headbands coming up behind us. Uh-oh, that's these other guys. And they really hate those guys. Okay, so what?" Is like, "Oh, you got to get out of here." "Okay, well, we can't." And it's like, and then it's just all of a sudden everything keeps getting thrown in, and it's just ridiculous. And but it's exciting because there's a lot of fun martial arts action and cool weapons and just fun moments of the action adventure stuff, and lots of fantastical mythology related things. And then, of course, we haven't, like, I mentioned Kim Cattrall once, but, like, she plays a character named Gracie Law, who's sort of a do-gooder, altruist lawyer type who is also very involved with this community, despite not being Asian American. But, like, she's been involved, and so she's kind of in on the whole thing, too. And I'm just remembering, I'm doing the thing that I just said at the beginning. It's like, "Hey, remember when they captured her and her journalist friend? And so, like, has the journalist friend who's also more knowledgeable than Jack, but is kind of a little bit mousier. And when she and Gracie Law get kidnapped by the bad guys, and we see them in these holding cells, we see the journalist character completely unbound, writing in a notebook, like a diary entry, like everything has become strange. I am finding myself in feeling things and going like that. And then we pan over to Gracie Law, who's literally hogtied with her hands and feet behind her back and gagged. It's just, and the suggestion of why the two of them would be in those different circumstances is good environmental storytelling.
Yes.
Anyway, so that's kind of, I think, why I wanted to bring up Big Trouble in Little China first, is just because I thought that so much of what that movie has to offer is really kind of straightforward, in the sense that it's got a lot of crazy things that happen in a fun and exciting way. It's often pretty funny. I don't think that there's very many other movies that really sort of take a story where you have a comic relief sidekick character, but then frame the whole movie as though that's the main character. I just can't really think of another example of that. Because there are certainly movies about bumbling heroes with competent sidekicks, right?
Hmm.
But it's usually a different kind of story, right? Because this is a story with a competent hero, Wang, with a comic relief sidekick who occasionally helps out, but the story is shifted over to focus on the sidekick and not the other way. So it's not like
Yeah.
the Inspector Gadget model.
Uso.
Yeah, right. Where we have a bumbling hero whose sidekick is the real power behind the throne, so to speak, or the real brains of the operation or whatever. It's like, that's not exactly what's happening here, but it still subverts a lot of the tropes in a way that I can't really think of another example. And it's just like, I picked it as an old reliable because I just never get tired of it. I could always just put it on, and it's fun to watch because it's got a lot of action and a lot of silliness, and it's easy to consume. So
It is. It's one of those movies where, you know how there's some movies where if they're on and if you get started, like you can start at any point, but you will watch the whole thing. This
yeah,
one is different. Like this is a easy, if this is on TV, like you can come in and out of this movie.
yeah,
You can have it on, watch a little bit of it, go and do some chore or something like that, come back, laugh a little bit more. Like once you've seen it, like right,
mm-hmm.
once you kind of put it on, once you kind of know the whole story, the mystery or whatever. But this isn't one that's it doesn't necessarily have to suck you in like a Shawshank or something where you can start that at any point, but you will finish the movie if you start it, right?
But
um,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah. No, I was gonna say, uh, and I also disagree that I think just the general why this is an old reliable is it just you just leave feeling good. Like you're never like rolling on the ground laughing. Um, like it doesn't have that kind of oomph to it,
Right,
but
it's
it's just an
fun.
overall pleasant, happy feeling, which is why you leave thinking it was a comedy, but when you're actually watching it, you're like,
Yeah,
this is not a comedy.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's often funny, but for most of the runtime, it's fun as opposed to funny.
Yeah, it's a lot similar to Goonies in a way, I think.
I could see that. In the
Not
sense
from a
that,
storytelling perspective, but the feeling. Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, I could see that. I think it's certainly not ever heavy, right? I don't think there's a single moment in this movie that's sad, because even in the times when things are not going their way, in this movie, we don't ever believe for a second that they're not going to win, right? Like, there's no real tension in that regard. But it's like a pulp adventure of, it's not that we think they are going to die, It's that we can't wait to see how they don't die.
Right.
And it's just a lot of fun. I mean, Kurt Russell is so great in it, just because he's got this whole sort of swaggering bravado of, say, a John McClane, right? And especially with his kind of endless rambling into the CB radio and all of this swagger is just like it's a very memorable character, I think. Lots of great quotes. I'm just there. Just pulling up one of the early on bits is like, when some wild-eyed 8-foot-tall maniac grabs your neck, taps the back of your favorite head up against the barroom wall, and he looks you crooked in the eye, and he asks you if you paid your dues, you just stare that big sucker right back in the eye. You remember what old Jack Burton says at a time like that? Have you paid your dues, Jack? Yes, sir. The check is in the mail. I think it's fun as opposed to funny, right? Like, it's not a joke, but it's a fun sort of way to speak. It's a fun sort of attitude for him to have, especially when he doesn't give it up, even in circumstances where he is so out of step with everything that's happening. Like, frequently bits is like, what old Jack Burton says about this? And they're like, who? Jack Burton, me. And it just breaks this whole rhythm. Anyway, so I could just go on and on, of course, about bits that I like, but I think there's not a lot of depth necessarily to discuss, and so I think that is kind of why I volunteered to do that one first. So, do I love this movie? Yes. Do I think people should watch it? Yes. Do I think it is necessary to talk endlessly about it? Probably not.
Yes.
Well, I
Or
could.
do you want to talk endlessly about it? Is it
but
necessary?
Necessary,
Yeah.
no.
Necessary, no. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to? Of course.
Yeah, it's more fun to watch than to talk about.
It is
There
a
are
fun
movies
movie.
that are the other way around, but this is certainly the former. So, you know what? It just occurred to me that I didn't put the little poster up, so I'm going to do that just briefly so that people will know
Okay.
that
Well,
I had
you're
it ready.
doing that and then switching it. I have a dinner. Like, I just want to make sure it's not going to burn my house down.
Okay.
I'll
Well,
run back to
well,
yeah.
I will fill time by going through and reading more quotes from the IMDb page. Yeah. Uh, let's see what. Oh, well, one actually, instead of doing that, I'll just talk a little bit about the. I like the framing device that opens the movie, because we start the framing device with sort of like, it's a scene that takes place after the main story, and it features the character Egg Shen, who is one of the characters in the movie, who's involved with this whole adventure. He's sort of the wise old sage type, who also works as a tour bus driver, and he is being interviewed by the FBI, ostensibly about some sort of a large-scale crime that Jack Burton is involved with, and it's all framed like Jack is some weird like vigilante secret agent or something that the FBI is looking for, and Egg Chen is trying to cover for him. And then it's like, wait, and you're saying that this was actually magic? It's like, oh yeah. But then it's like, well, could you prove to me that it's magic? And then Egg Chen, sitting right there in this FBI guy's office, zaps lightning between his fingers and says, see, that was nothing. And it's just an interesting way to begin the movie that my understanding was a late addition to the film. But I think it's interesting that it sets the expectation right away that there is real magic. Real stuff is happening. This is not, not something we're doubting. So it puts us in a position as viewers right away to understand that there is actual fantastical stuff happening, and kind of prepares us and teases us with more, because he does a cool little lightning trick and says that was nothing. So now he's like, oh, well, now I want to see more. All right. So now that you
The dog heard me say that I need to go check on dinner, and all he heard was dinner.
Well, sure.
So I went down to kind of stir, make sure everything was going well, and he just.
Yep. Barking the dog.
Yeah.
All right, so
All right.
without further ado, then let's talk about your selection for Old Reliable. More obviously, an actual comedy, The Big Lebowski.
Yes. So part of the reason I picked this is because this movie has actually grown on me over the course of time. Like
Mm-hmm.
it has it I never would have thought that this would be an Old Reliable, which is why I thought it would be fun to put it in because it truly is now. Like I can enjoy this movie at any time.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time I watched it, like I don't know if it's because the person who showed it to me had overhyped it, or if it's just a weird movie to kind of wade into the first time. And this is coming from somebody who's watched a number of Coen Brothers movies.
Mm-hmm.
But the first friend of mine that said, "You've got to watch this. Like, this is the funniest movie you'll ever see." And I watched it and I was like, I don't get why he liked it so much. Like, it wasn't that funny, I thought. And then I watched it again and I was like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, that stuff's kind of funny. And started laughing at some parts. But I don't know, for some reason, this movie just gels over time, which is what makes it all reliable, is that every time I go back to it, I remember something that I didn't think about, or learn something new, or there's a new joke that I didn't quite catch, or and then again, there's those quotable moments. Like I think I have probably used the quote, "You're not wrong, Walter, if you're just an asshole,"
Yes.
more
Yes.
times than any movie quote ever, because it's so applicable to so many real life situations.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
this just reminds me, interacting with this person reminds me like of that. Yes, no, I get your point. It's not that your point is incorrect. You're just being a jerk.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
I think I had the same observation on Twitter when I did my own rewatch of this. Just that line in particular, it just because this movie kind of predates Twitter, but it's such a useful thing to apply to social media in general.
yes.
Um,
So I could take a stab at the plot.
sure. Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I mean, it's named after the Big Lebowski, who's actually not the main character.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we have two characters named Jeff Lebowski.
Right.
One is our main character, who's Jeff Bridges, also known and insistent upon being called the Dude, who is, I don't know that he's really a stereotypical, like, California bum. Like, he's kind of his own stereotype, but it's almost like the like you talked about, the Storm characters pulling from a whole, like,
Right. Yeah.
mythology. Like, he kind of pulls from a lot of different elements.
Almost more archetypal than
Yeah,
stereotypical.
archetypal. Yeah, so they're taking a lot of different elements of lazy stoner Southern California,
Right.
hippie, older, middle-aged guy without a job, and sort of amalgamating it into this one person. And
Yeah.
he does a phenomenal job with it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a mistaken identity between the Dude and the other Jeff Lebowski, which he refers to as the Big Lebowski, because that is the Lebowski, the millionaire Lebowski.
Mm-hmm.
And so these characters, it gets super complicated also because
In some ways, there's actually a fair amount of like loose story structure overlap with this and Big Trouble in Little China, because it's a someone who's not really involved with the situation ending up getting involved. There's a missing girl. He's kind of having to try to solve this mystery and figure it all out, but he doesn't really know what he's doing.
yep. Yeah, so he gets involved because when the first group comes looking for Jeff Lebowski, they, in order to intimidate him, they urinate on his favorite rug. So he decides that he's going to go ask the Big Lebowski to replace his rug, since it's only fair, man. Like, they were looking for you.
Mm-hmm.
you know? Uh, And this is one of the parts I always forget about this movie, but I absolutely love is it's so underrated. At the end of that, the guy has basically told him to screw off, that he's a bum. He'll always be a bum. He doesn't give handouts. You have nothing to do. And then he walks out of the room and his sidekick or whatever, his, butler,
Mm-hmm.
first lieutenant, whatever the guy is,
Yeah.
says, chief of staff, whatever, says, oh, what did he say was a resolution? He said, pick out any rug in the house.
Yeah.
Like, so good.
Yeah.
Like, just what an entry to who this character is.
Well, so I think one thing that's striking about this movie is that in a lot of respects, what it's drawing the most from is hard-boiled detective fiction.
Yes. I mean, there's
Um,
even a point where he gets called out by another private investigator as
a
I
Seamus,
think,
a
brother
dick.
Shames.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he was like, I don't even know what that is. And he's
Yeah.
like, fellow private eye.
Yeah. So it's definitely following that template, and a lot of the humor just comes from what if Sam Spade, instead of being a hard-boiled detective, was actually like a stoner, burnout, good, layabout. Um, um, and I want to go back to one of the things that you said right away, because this is one of the things that I have frequently thought to myself about this movie and used it as an example of this is the perfect example of a movie that you really have to watch more than once, because the first time you watch it, you're trying to figure out the mystery. You're following along with the movie on the plot level, and it doesn't mean you can't enjoy some of the stuff along the way, but you are caught up in wanting to know what the answer to the mystery is. And ultimately, that is so not the point of the movie, to the degree that when you watch the movie caught up with the mystery, the resolution is pretty disappointing. And so it would be easy, and I think very common, to watch this movie on that level and to feel vaguely unsatisfied at the end, because it kind of feels like, oh, the mystery kind of just turns into a big nothing. Not a lot comes of anything. Some sad stuff happens right at the end. And then you're left at the end of the movie going like, what was that? But then when you watch it the second time, knowing that that's how it all turns out, not pinning your hopes or expectations on any of that, you are able to better absorb the texture of this movie, the characterization, the dialogue, and all of that stuff. And that's where this movie really shines. But it's in some ways hard to perceive that the first time, because you're still trying to figure out the mystery, which is not the point.
Yeah.
And so,
And I think it's also a great like ensemble cast in a way of, it's almost, it's like, I think of it like Ocean's 11, where there's like all these characters that have like very specific, but of like bizarre California people,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there's this whole cast of characters that have a very specific function in the story, but they're so over the top,
Mm-hmm.
like in Ocean's 11, like they all kind of have like their lane, right?
Yeah.
What they're good at. That's sort of this too. There's the artist, and there's the millionaire with the young wife who's not actually a millionaire because his first wife actually had all the money, and like all these silly guys, and Donnie and Walter, and
Mm-hmm.
the way that it just puts all this together is,
Right.
to your point, like the textures and the interactions between all of them, and
Yeah, and
uh,
there's a lot of characters that, like, in some respects, really only exist to just be a weird scene for the dude to be in, right? But on the other hand, like a character like Santana, the Jesus, played by John Turturro, um, is a weird character, and you could say, what is the point of his character in the story? And the answer is nothing. He represents only the conflict that the dude actually cares about in his normal life.
Right.
He's a bowling rival.
He's a bowling rival, right?
Does he interact with the mystery storyline at all? No. He's just there to be weird and to represent the stuff that the dude wishes he could focus on, but he can't because he's being told that there's a girl missing and her life is in my hands and I don't know what to do with that. And and now that Jesus is coming over and giving me shit, my life is hard. That's kind of all the, but like all of the
But
characters
to
do.
that point, the bowling conflict is kind of a weird framing in this whole thing
Mm-hmm.
because it's treated as jokingly, but it's treated as the more serious like conflict. I mean, just
Yeah.
think even about like how some of the stuff they do. Walter, while he does bring a wrapped up some sort of gun, we're not really sure what it is on the bag.
It's like some kind of like an Uzi or something like that because
Yeah, he's got it all wrapped in like paper and it throws out, and he doesn't actually
but
use
when it
bullets.
hits the road, it's firing like pow 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 pow. It's not just like one shot.
No, the only time though he actually pulls a gun is on a dude who maybe stepped over the line in bowling. Like that's his
Yeah.
most serious like
Well,
use of a pistol, right? And then when
Walter.
they get all the nihilist stuff, like his no, all of a sudden it's like the guy doesn't have a pistol anymore.
Well,
You know?
but no, I want to comment on that because I think that Walter is a fascinating character because you go through most of the movie thinking this guy's just a nightmare. Like why does anyone spend any time with him? Like he is an asshole a lot of the time. He is dangerously unhinged a lot of the time. He complicates everything that he touches. He is giving nothing but bad advice every time he opens his mouth. But then with the nihilist fight, even though, yes, okay, like, why does he not have a gun anymore then? But he's the one that, like, actually steps up and gets the job done and actually accomplishes something in that fight and defends them against people who might have been willing to really hurt and or kill them.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying
Yeah.
to take
Well,
part away. I'm just saying the way the movie frames like that stuff, like that's the more serious conflict. Like the nihilist thing, he actually he becomes like a self defense, like he's actually caring about his friends, or sort of like whatever. But the time where he's actually agitated and wants to pull his pistol is in the bowling match, right?
Yeah,
like
right. Well, but I feel like it's even more than that because it is towards the end of the movie that you recognize it is like that's where you start seeing what Walter actually does kind of bring to the table, which is that he is, got some serious anger issues. He's very volatile, but for example, in that whole little final act, he's the one that succeeds in that fight against the nihilists. He's the one that has a credit card and can pay for Donnie's funeral, even if he's going to haggle over the price of an urn and put the ashes in a coffee can instead, because I'm not going to pay $200 for an urn that we're not even going to use for anything. He's the one that is going to blow up at the bureaucracy of the funeral home.
He's not wrong. Like
He's not wrong. It's exactly the guy is trying to say, even if you're going to spread the ashes, we must transmit the remains to you in a receptacle. And it's like, that's $200. And it's like, no. And he goes and he just buys a can of coffee and puts them in a coffee grounds can. But then he also is saying some nice words and he's kind of messing it up. But like in that moment, Donnie has died, which is sad because like Donnie is another perfect example of a character whose actual contribution to the plot is essentially zero, but he's nice. We like him.
Yeah.
He's kind of a loser just like the rest of them. He's never figuring out exactly what's going on, but he's nice. We like him. And he's sad when he dies. And he doesn't even die like really related to anything. He's scared by the fight and he has a heart attack. But then like in that scene where they spread the ashes, even though it obviously goes awry, he's miscalculating the wind, and it spreads the ashes all over the dude. But there's the moment where they hug each other, and like that's where, even after all of the crap that Walter has pulled throughout the movie, that's where you say, "Oh, okay, okay, I guess I kind of get it." Like, he's the asshole friend, but he's the friend that does occasionally sometimes come through when you really need him to. Even
Yeah,
if half the times when you really need him to come through is because he caused the problem in the first place.
but he always shows up. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing. Is like even though his plan for the money drop was ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately like didn't matter because they were the actual bag that supposedly had money didn't have money,
Yeah.
and the people picking it up didn't actually have the hostage.
Yeah.
So it makes it even sillier.
Mm-hmm.
But he did show up and he was ready. He was
Yeah.
ready to help,
Yeah.
even though the
Absolutely.
idea was terrible. His execution was terrible.
Mm-hmm.
He might have caused more trouble than he needed to.
Yeah.
He was there,
Right.
and he keeps showing up. And
Mm-hmm.
they almost, I mean, they do at the end. They're basically give credit to that. Like it doesn't like sometimes you're gonna have asshole friends, and
Yeah.
but if they keep showing up, eventually, like they'll do something useful. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so yeah, his character is great though.
Yeah. I agree. It's an amazing, iconic character from John Goodman. That's just so much fun to watch, and like in particular, like especially once you've seen it a couple of times, the dialogue in particular, like the editing and the pacing of the arguments between Jeff and the dude, with Donnie piping in, not understanding what's going on and just breaking everybody's rhythms, is just sublime. The dialogue pacing and the editing of those whole conversations is just so amazing, because they each have very distinct character voices in terms of the way they speak, and you can just see Walter keeps trying to get into this rant with the rhythm, and interrupted by Donnie, which infuriates him. And then the dude asks a reasonable but kind of ill-prepared question, and then Walter's trying to change gears to answer that now, but then Donnie's still saying what? And it's just the interplay between the three of them is incredible.
yeah, and I love the way that they always have like they don't make Donnie seem like an idiot. Like they always have him coming in from he either just finished rolling or he
Mm-hmm.
just got something from the bar or
Yeah.
like he's always has some reason that he like ends up late.
Well,
It's not like
right. Yeah.
yeah.
And like my impression of Donnie is like it's not just that he's an idiot, but like he does seem like
Oh, he's
he's a
simple.
little slow. He's he doesn't pay very close attention, but does want to be involved. And like when a conversation is ongoing, just like he's bowling and he comes back in, but then he wants to join in, even though he understands that and like, but that's a fun character too. And like Steve Buscemi playing that role is just so fun. Like especially, coming out of like Fargo or some of the other roles that we had seen him in up to that point, seeing him play just this genial, good-natured, friendly doofus, is it's just very sweet. Because he doesn't know what's going on, but he's very nice about it. He just wants to help. He's just trying to figure out what's going on so he can contribute.
Yes. Um, I mean, this is also a movie where we could go through and be
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, remember that one scene? Like, when you're talking about like Walter's character, like
Mm-hmm.
there's this absurd part where they find out that like the dude's car was taken for a joyride by a 16-year-old, but at this point they don't realize that there wasn't actually any money in the briefcase.
Yeah.
So they are convinced that this 16-year-old has millions of dollars, and
Mm-hmm.
but he's just a weird antisocial kid who
Yeah.
doesn't really know what to do when two weird adults like confront him, and
Mm-hmm.
and just the way that kid sits there as they like
It's just
ratchet up trying to get the money out of him, and then when it ends up him going and smashing down.
well, and like that scene in particular is one of the scenes that like the Coen brothers do so well and often kind of insert into, like, this movie is one of their more bizarre ones, right? Like, so several of their movies are more grounded than this one, right? Not even just because of the dream sequences and everything, but just throwing in all of these little elements that turn the scene surreal, like having, little Larry sitting there on the living room couch, but in the background is his dad, who apparently was a famous TV writer decades ago.
Yeah,
That was one of Walter's favorite shows, but he's in an iron lung. And the exchange that makes me laugh out loud every time in that scene is when Walter asks, like, the housekeeper about this guy who's in an iron lung, and says, "So does he still write?" And she says, "Oh no, he has health problems." It's just like, yeah, I guess so, right?
Well, and the capper on the scene is that they assume this brand new car that still has like the stickers from the dealership is the kid's car, even though the kid never says anything about it.
Yeah, and it's just a coincidence, right? Yeah. But what's funny about it, of course, is the kid doesn't say anything, so Walter's furious, and he goes out and starts beating up the car with a crowbar. But of course, that triggers the actual owner of the car, which is just this other guy in his underwear, to come out and start beating up the dude's piece of shit car.
Destroy your car. Yeah,
yeah, which is this terrible car that's already a mess.
It's not his car. Yeah. So Walter's destroying not the kid's car, and the neighbor whose car it is destroying not Walter's car. Yeah.
Which is already a piece of crap. Because that's already even after him having to go pick it up from the impound where it had been in an accident, and then
because that's how they found Larry, because was when they got it from the impound. His homework was in there.
Yeah. And there's so many just amazing little details in here that, again, like, when you're still following the mystery, you're puzzling over them, like, how does this mean anything? And the answer, of course, is that it doesn't. It's just there for weird texture. But just the fact that they tracked down Larry by virtue of he left his English homework in the car, and he's a poor student. He's a poor student, and it's got all of these red markups of, like, see me, this is not how that's spelled, use a dictionary. And then Walter takes the homework and he puts it in a Ziploc bag like it's evidence. It's amazing, but all of that stuff takes on an entirely different feel when you know that the mystery doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that's why I think it's a movie that a lot of people feel that way, the way you described, which is that it kind of grows on you. And I think that's because the real joys that it has to offer are not apparent at first, and you kind of have to watch it more than once. And as much as, like, there's so many pieces of entertainment out there in the world right now that you frequently find yourself in a position of saying, like, oh, well, this TV show is great, but the first season's not so good. So if you can just get through the first season, then it's really good. And it's an entirely fair response for someone to say, I don't want to have to watch 20 hours of television before it's good. Like, there's probably something else I could watch that's good right now. And so it's a hard recommendation anymore, I think, to try to sell someone on something that they're not necessarily going to love right away. But this is, I think, is a good example of a movie that I know when I first watched it, I came out of the theater going, I don't know, that was kind of weird. I'm not sure how I feel about it. But now I love it. And it's because I was willing to give it another chance.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like I said, I watched it with a friend. I didn't see it in the theater. I just watched it at their house, and I was like, I felt really bad because they were like laughing and like, and I was like, because again, you're right. You're so focused on like the mystery. I'm like, I don't understand why that's funny, you know. And then you just start to like really watch it again and just absorb yourself and kind of the fun part of it, and that's what makes it an old reliable. And the like I said, there's the one quote that I probably use more than any other quote ever, and then there's plenty of other good quotes. Yeah, another one that's actually very useful is like, "Hey, careful, man. There's a beverage here."
Useful. Okay. No, I mean I love the line, but useful is kind of funny.
Well, it's useful, yeah. When
Yeah.
you're at a party or something like that, and somebody like bumps into you or like knocks something, you're like, I mean, it's an easy line. Hey,
Yeah. Yeah.
careful, man. There's a beverage here.
Mhm. Mhm.
um, so that one I use also. And then there's just really funny ones I never use, but like just remember, like the rug really tied the room together. The
Yeah.
fact
Yeah.
they weave that whole thing just, and not
Mhm.
only is it a funny line, it reminds us the only reason he's here is because at the very beginning somebody urinated on his
Yeah.
rug thinking that he was a mistake and
Yeah.
had mistaken identity, and that is the whole thing that launched all of this, right?
Right. Well, and like one of the other lines that comes to me sometimes is um, there's a scene midway through where Sam Elliott, who has been doing the cowboy voiceover narration framing device for the whole movie, is suddenly just at the bowling alley where the dude is, and they have a conversation at the bar there. But in that conversation, that sometimes you eat the bar, and sometimes the bar eats you. But we haven't even talked about, like, we've got David Huddleston, who is the other Jeffrey Lebowski, Philip Seymour Hoffman, who is just an amazing actor in a relatively small role, but still just nails it. He just delivers. He was so great. It's such a tragedy that we lost him as young as we did. Um,
Yes.
yeah. And then we haven't even talked about Julianne Moore, who's also in it and kind of incredible. And she's the first person in the movie to basically just tell us and the dude that, like, you're wasting your time, this mystery is stupid.
Yeah,
Um,
everything about this is dumb.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like, it's like, someone kidnapped her. Oh, no, I assure you that's not true. She's just off in Vegas somewhere. I think she even says something like to that effect. But she's the one that kind of like, she doesn't have all the pieces, but she's the one that, like, in terms of solving the mystery, such as it is, she's the one that really gives kind of the crucial piece of realizing that the big Jeffrey Lebowski doesn't really have control of a lot of money personally. It's he plays at that, but all of the money's really in a foundation. Um,
Right.
and so that's kind of what unlocks the whole thing eventually. Well, that plus the realization that she really wasn't kidnapped. She really did just go to Vegas, and everything else was incidental. Or not incidental, but trying to take advantage of them not knowing where she was.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, I didn't go into detail in each act, but
Oh, sure,
each,
sure. No, yeah.
yeah, those were the kind of the people I was mentioning in that sort of that Ocean's 11 type frame. Like she's a very particular character of this like eccentric artist,
Mm-hmm.
daughter of a millionaire, who wants to be impregnated by somebody that she never has to actually raise the child again. Like she has, again, it's this amalgamation of like so many,
Mm-hmm.
you know, types. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like everyone fills a role from like the hard-boiled mystery archetype that this is all coming from, right? Like
True also, yeah.
everyone, like this is the Maltese Falcon in a funhouse mirror, right? It's everyone is not quite what they should be, but nonetheless, they're still all trying to do their part anyway. And so many just bizarre, surreal little details, like the one time that the dude tries to actually be slick and pull off a cool detective move is when he's there with Jackie Treehorn, sees him write something on a notepad and then leave, and he says, "Oh, I'm going to do the old pencil trick," and like rub the pencil along to try to get the impression of what he wrote. And all he had done was draw a pencil drawing of a dude with an erection, and it's just like, Well, that's what did you, you know, I don't, there, that's what you
That
get.
whole involvement is so bizarre because it's like it's almost like you in an LA hardcore detective story somehow the porn industry has to be involved. Like
Yeah.
it
Well,
has to feel like the Black Dahlia or something
yeah,
like
or, Chinatown or,
that.
the,
Yeah, in reality, it's just like yeah, the whole scene where he ends up going there and they drug him at the party only to
mhm.
kick him out to get him arrested. Like it was all
Well,
very
it's because, like, everyone has their own piece going on that they assume that the dude actually knows more than he really does, but only because they assume something like that their part is what's actually meaningful, right? Because Bunny Lebowski wasn't really kidnapped, but she does really owe him a bunch of money. And so when Jackie Treehorn has the dude show up, it's like, wait, what is this? Oh, she's kidnapped, is she? I see this. What this is? She hired you to try to cover for her, so that like that I'll stop looking for her or something like that, right? Like he's basically saying you're wasting my time. I'm gonna get rid of you. But yeah, at the same time, all of it is like, is it really rational that his character would do that? Well, maybe no, not really, but he's also just trying to say, I'm trying to discredit anything you might say about me, you know, by having you show up intoxicated in a way that the chief of police in Malibu would get really mad at you.
yeah, throw
Throw a coffee mug at your head.
a cotton look at your head,
Well,
which leads. But that's the genius of the Coen brothers too.
mm-hmm.
Like that, like the way they tie all these things together. Like how every time he gets hurt, the Julianne Moore character keeps telling him to go to this particular doctor.
Yeah, he's very
And
good and thorough.
yeah, and he's like, no, I mean, I'm fine. And she's like, no, you need to go see this doctor. And then what we realize is that it's a
Yeah.
fertility expert because she wants the dude to
Mm-hmm.
have a child with her, but not be a part of the.
Well, make sure he doesn't have any STDs or something.
Yeah, so she
Yeah.
wants him to go to this doctor. So every time he gets like, so have
Yeah.
you seen that doctor I sent you to yet? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just a weird, yeah. I mean, it's the way it all ties together, like many of their movies, but
Yeah.
it does a lot of the things they do well
Mm-hmm.
in a very funny, fulfilling way. So
One of the movies that comes to mind as we've been discussing it is a very different film in terms of tone, but I'm just going to shout it out because I'm never not recommending this movie. Is Brick, which is directed by Ryan Johnson, but before he got to do big movies like Star Wars. Um, but it is a film noir detective hardboiled sort of story, but it's set in a high school, where all of the characters are like high school students, and so like the scene that would be the detective having to get called in by the sheriff's office, he's actually going to the vice principal's office and stuff like that. And it's all in and around this high school, but it's it's a really interesting movie in terms of taking some of these same tropes and playing with them in terms of setting rather than tone, which just
yeah,
came
I've
to
seen
mind.
it, but I
Hmm?
don't remember that. Yeah.
Well, we did a "Hey, want to watch a movie" on it way back in the day, but
I
um,
think that's the only time I've seen it then,
yeah,
so I was probably a little. I mean, I
yeah.
probably
Well,
watched it, but I was distracted
sure,
with the
no,
conversation.
but yeah, I recommend that one. It's got Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it, in as the lead, when he's a little baby face there. But in any case, it's not really related to Big Lebowski, except that I kept thinking about it because it's also sort of a noir that plays with the genre a little bit. But in any case, uh, The Big Lebowski is great. It's just so weird and funny, and just we didn't even talk about the dream sequences.
Those are my favorite part of the movie,
Hmm,
honestly.
well, that's fair. I just mean that Not that they have to be the favorite part as much as just they're notable. You know what I mean?
They
Like,
are, but and I honestly, I think I blame them unfairly, maybe
hmm,
for like, because I think your point as to the
yeah,
first is accurate in that you're trying to figure out the mystery and like you're trying to engage with this like a serious like mystery,
hmm,
and then these dream sequences keep getting thrown in, where it's just like what, like this isn't helping advance anything, and I think I still have leftover baggage
hmm,
of not just allowing those to exist the same way that all the other scenes
yeah.
exist. I think because I think they were so impactful in my first viewing of like this. I don't get why these are here,
Hmm.
right?
Well, so there's two dream sequences. One
Just
is when he gets
talk about
drugged
them
by
because they
Jackie.
actually do.
Hmm? What?
I said, I guess we should talk about them since they actually provoked such a reaction out of
Well,
me.
yeah, I was just gonna say, like, so there's two. There's one when he gets drugged by Jackie Treehorn, and that's the one, if I recall correctly, where he is, he starts out flying, but then it kind of segues into a nightmare where he's being chased by the nihilists and all of that sort of stuff. That one is like, there's some okay stuff in it, but I think it's less interesting overall. The one that I think is especially fun, though, is the whole just dropped in music video thing that our poster image here comes from. Like that's the one. Like it doesn't
That's
really tie very much into the rest, but it's so much fun to watch. I think.
that's the drug one
Yeah.
because that's
Oh, are you sure?
yes, because the whole point is that the reason he's dressed like that is because he's been at the porn star's house and he's dressed like the carpenter coming in for the porn movie.
Well, so
The whole point, like he's meant to be
but
entering like porn.
but so I hear what you're saying, but the one that ends with where it turns into a nightmare and he's running away from the nihilists and they got the big scissors and they're in the weird outfits is definitely the one that he after the Jackie Treehorn because that's where he comes to running down the highway before he gets arrested.
Correct. I think these are the same.
Okay. See, because I thought that the other one was where he's flying along, but then he gets handed the bowling ball and he falls, and that's where it turns into the nightmares. Is what I was thinking, but maybe I'm misremembering.
I think you're misremembering. I think that is what happens in the first one. The first one, he's flying and he falls with a bowling ball and then he's rolling down the gutter, but it doesn't turn into the nightmare. He just wakes up at that point. It's mostly the flying in the first one.
Okay.
The more extended one is the second one, where he starts like this and
Well,
then
maybe that makes sense
he
in the
gets
sense that
bold.
one of them is triggered, I think, by when he is laying on the rug and listening to whale songs and he gets punched out.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the more simple one. Flying, drop the
right.
bowling ball.
Okay,
This is
so yeah,
one.
maybe you're right because the other one maybe it does make sense that it would start out so positive and surreal like the music video and then turn negative because he's been drugged with like real drugs and is not just knocked unconscious.
Right. So it starts out with this sort of carpenter meeting the girl thing, and then I think that's where he like goes. He gets bold, but not as a ball, but as a
Mm-hmm.
human, and he's
Yeah.
like going underneath like the music video, and he's like rolling up and like checking and like grimace, like giggling at being able to see under their dresses.
Well, that's definitely in this music video one still though too.
Right. And that's when it then turns when he finishes that. That's when it
Oh
transitions
yeah.
to
Okay. Mm-hmm.
they're trying to like come at him with the scissors
Right.
and he ends up going up. Yeah.
All right. So in any case though,
Anyways, those are the dream
yeah.
sequences. Yeah.
Um, a lot of the stuff that's in this movie is obviously really there just to be weird, and the framing device is really to just kind of allow them to tie it all together. But like, there's a lot of like a lot of the Coen brothers' other movies that are a little more grounded. Will occasionally have one really strange scene or something like that. Um, but this one certainly has a lot, right?
Yeah.
You compare it to, like, for example, Fargo, there's some weirdness in it, but mostly it's all just kind of, it's straight ahead, right? And like, there's some comedy just coming from sort of the sort of people that we don't expect to be in this story being in this story, but otherwise the story is straightforward, right?
Right.
But compared to something like "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," where everything's kind of heightened and there's the musical element of it, and it's all a little bit silly, but it's not generally surreal in quite the same way
Right.
as this one is. And so, I don't know. The Coen brothers do a lot of different things, I guess. So, anyway,
Anyway, so that should wrap this
yeah,
one up.
I think so. So, something that we keep saying that we're going to do before we record is decide what the theme for the next one should be so that we're prepared. But we didn't this time, even with a long gap between episodes. Does anything come to mind? We are coming into the second half of September and into October, so we could do horror again.
Good. I haven't really been in a horror mood lately, though. Like,
Fair. It's just a suggestion.
no, it was good.
Mm-hmm.
I almost want. So I sent you a tweet from a comedian that I like
Okay.
about Inside Man,
Mm-hmm.
which we did as the heist movie, and he wrote, "Inside Man is a top 5 heist movie. Please write down your dissenting opinions in a journal, and then put a lock on that journal and toss it into an active volcano." Essentially, just confirming that he strongly believes that Inside Man is a top 5 heist movie. But
Well,
I kind of want to watch another heist movie, but I know that's not like.
well,
I feel like
I mean, I think like I don't dislike heist movies, but we did do a heist movie episode not too long ago.
you asked me what I was feeling, so I'm willing to not do that.
Okay.
If you're asking me if I want to revisit something, it's not going to be horror.
Fair.
It's going to be heist movies.
Okay.
So maybe we should not revisit something.
Okay. All right. So instead of suggesting something else you want to do, you picked another thing that was pre-vetoed. So way to contribute.
I've told you 2 things that we aren't going to do: another heist movie and another horror movie. So I've eliminated 2 categories of all the categories that exist.
Oh, well done.
That's my assistance on this one.
What about
Sports movies. It's fall.
I mean, we could do that. I was going to say if, kind of along with the old reliable, like a movie that you remember liking but haven't watched in a really long time and feel like maybe it would be interesting to revisit. But I don't know if anything immediately comes to mind for you.
A couple of things, too, but I want to think about it before I made the call.
Okay. I wouldn't necessarily mind doing a sports movie episode. Like, I'm not generally huge into sports movies or sports in general, but there are certainly many that I like. In fact, I think probably what I would pick is A League of Their Own.
That's a good one.
Mm-hmm. So, you want that to be the category, and I'll pick A League of Their Own, and you can pick some other sports movie?
Yeah, I love Remember the Titans.
Okay, great. All right, so sports movies, A League of Their Own, and Remember the Titans, and obviously we'll probably talk about a handful of others along the way.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of great sports movies, but this is the one we'll call them heartwarming sports movies.
As opposed to what the
more adventure-y sports movies, like I don't know, like there's plenty of sports movies. Yeah, I don't know, just
name
watch
one.
These.
Name one.
The problem is I'm thinking of one and I can't think of the dang name of it. Like it's not clicking in my head. It's
Okay.
the Al Pacino, Jamie Foxx.
Oh, Any Given Sunday.
Any Given Sunday, yeah. So that's why I say I could pick one. I just can't think of the dang movie. Like Any Given Sunday, Friday Night Lights. Now that's kind of like, so those are more like inspirational, like go get them, like action adventure type sports movies.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like A League of Their Own is more comedic, heartfelt, like and so is Remember the Titans. So we're going to go with that.
All right. Well, so there we have it. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. We'll be back to discuss those movies we just said. So you can watch those, and in the meantime, generally, watch good movies.
Good movies.